Welcome everyone to the Hypnosis Masters interview and seminar series. My name is Igor Ledochowski from the hypnosistrainingacademy.com. And this week's master is a very interesting gentleman. I think you'll really enjoy everything that he has to share. His name is James Hazlerig, and he's from hypnotic-stories.com. That's hypnotic-stories.com. First of all, let's just welcome James onto the discussion. Hi James, how are you doing?
Doing wonderful today. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good.
And I'm very pleased to be speaking with you and interviewing you for everyone, of course, because you have first of all, a very fascinating history, and secondly, a really interesting take on the idea of using hypnotic stories for influence, change, and so on. And I think people will kind of really enjoy the way that you address that whole thing. So that's hopefully enough of a appetite wetter for everyone. Let's get launched into the start of your journey, because you got a very interesting start with your relationship to hypnosis, do you not?
I do, yeah, and it gives me a lot of bragging rights, I guess. I'm actually a hypno baby. My mother, back in the year I was born, I'll reveal my age, 1967,
right,
used hypnosis to control the pain of childbirth.
Wow, that's pretty progressive for the 60s, isn't it?
Well, yes, and actually, she was first trained for that in 1958 when my oldest brother was born.
Even more progressive there.
Yeah, well, and she had a female OBGYN, so very progressive.
Wow.
And that OBGYN was a hypnotist.
Amazing.
Yeah. I actually quizzed my mom at one point about the experience to see if by perchance her doctor had been trained by Elman, but it was a totally different technique. So
that's a shame. I was going to say, because Elman and Erickson were both very heavily into teaching that sort of stuff at the time. So, well, it's good to know that there were other hypnotists around as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is interesting. So your mother was trained in 58 to basically give birth the natural way, without any pain, without any drugs and so on, and has done so for, it seems like, your entire family. So what kind of mythology did that build in your household growing up with this as part of your story repertoire? You know, every kid asks about the day where they're born, and everyone gets told childhood stories and so on. How did that affect you, do you think?
Well, every time one of my siblings or I had a birthday, and I'm the youngest of four, we heard the story of the birth, and shuffling through the snow for my brother's birth and all that sort of thing. And every time my mother very proudly talked about how she had this post-hypnotic trigger that had been set up, in my case, 9 years before my birth. And of course, after my oldest brother was born, all the other doctors thought she was practicing witchcraft or something. They had no idea. You're going to do what? And she would just tap her arm, and she said, I knew about the pain, but it was on the other side of the room, and it had nothing to do with me.
Right.
So yeah, I got to grow up with that fantastic narrative, knowing that hypnosis is something real and that it really works, and that it's a contrast to the Roadrunner version that most kids get on tunes.
Absolutely, and I think that kind of sets you up very nicely for understanding the power of hypnosis without getting sucked into the drama and the crises and the evil hypnosis stuff that TV likes to focus on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So then, even though you had this wonderful predestined sign of hypno-babiness, you didn't actually get onto the hypnosis road for a little while. What did you do before that? How did you... just give a little bit of your background before you went to hypnosis so we can see how that all blends together.
Sure. Well, I went off to college, and my goal was actually to become an English professor. I was fascinated with the Middle Ages, and I wanted to... study Old English, poetry, Beowulf, and all that, which I did a great deal. In fact, I ended up getting a master's degree in English.
Right.
And but during the process of all that, I struggled with depression a lot in my teens, in my 20s, and really I had to come to terms with the idea that my own thoughts were going to control my reality.
Right.
And I
Right.
had to figure out how to change all that. And so it kind of sideways led me around toward exploring that question of
Right.
how we define reality.
Now, this again is very interesting because what that shows is you've got the classic wounded healer's profile. In other words, what brings you into this field is actually trying to work with yourself first, and that's one of the reasons you've got such a good connection to working this way, because you see from the inside out, you felt from your own experience what it's done for you. So the idea of doubting, once you've got over your own stuff, of course, is much less now because you've seen what it has done for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of realized it was all about the stories I told myself.
So how did that come about? How did you make that realization from? Because a lot of people, when they're depressed, it's a terrible condition, especially if it's quite major and it sucks all the will to live out of you and the joy of life and so on. But a lot of people start believing their own narrative. You, on the other hand, went the opposite way. You started studying it instead. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, in all fairness, I briefly saw a counselor who
Okay.
actually suggested to me the idea of a life script and this
Right.
idea that everyone tells themselves a story about their own life. And I
Okay.
really bought into that.
Well, being an English major, that must have really tickled your curiosity, no?
It did, absolutely. And of course, like most liberal arts majors, I had the Psych 101 class. And at one point, our instructor, who was a TA, talked to us about this brand new, exciting idea in psychology, which, I couldn't even remember the name of it for years until I encountered it again. But
Okay.
basically, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, okay.
The idea that it's not what happens to you that controls your emotions, it's how you interpret what happens to you.
Right. Which is basically a rediscovery of 3,000-year-old wisdom. The Greeks were doing all this stuff when they founded for the idea of philosophy, right?
Exactly. And in fact, I was a smart ass little kid, so I went up
Right.
to the instructor after class and I said, "So basically nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so."
Right.
And the instructor said, "Yeah, wait, say that again." And I said it again.
What
She
an
wrote it
enlightening
down.
thing, right?
Yeah. She said, "Can I quote you?" And I said, "No, you can quote Shakespeare." And
Yeah.
I didn't have a mic, but I would have dropped it at that moment if I'd had one,
Yeah, I
So I'm like,
believe it.
"Yeah, English majors, we know all this stuff."
Yeah.
Uh, I'm a little embarrassed by that now.
Sure, but actually, it must be quite empowering that a lot of people see studying English majors and stuff like that as basically an exercise in futility, just reading stuff into stuff, and what's the point? But actually, there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of value in the great books, and that's why they're worth studying, is it not?
I agree completely. Yeah, I think one of the amazing things stories do for us is contain wisdom and transmit it through the generations.
Right. So then we're at the early start of your kind of your student career. You've been an English major. You've got a bit of psychology background. You are battling with depression, so that you now have this holy grail of your own, which is basically the search for what story you want to define your life rather than the one that's currently defining you. What happens next? How does that unfold into the person that becomes the man called James Hazlerig?
Well, I'll actually flash back a little bit to
Okay.
something that was happening at the same time. About 2 weeks into my college career, on a Sunday afternoon, I was in the dormitory, and I guess I was about to do laundry or something, and I heard this curious sound, like a chink, 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 moving down the hallway, and I
Okay.
looked out, and there's this guy, and he's wearing high top tennis shoes and blue jeans and a red hoodie and a chainmail hauberk.
Why?
He's wearing medieval armor in the
That,
dorm.
that that's something that would definitely arrest your attention, would it not?
Yeah, and I mean, I was already a nut for medieval stuff. I had been a Dungeons and Dragons player in high school and all.
Right, right.
And I mean, my eyes must have been as big as saucers. And I said, "So what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm in the Society for Creative Anachronism." And I said, "What's that?" And he said,
Right.
we recreate the Middle Ages. And I said, sign me up. I want to be a part of that.
That's amazing. So of course that spoke to your interest in medieval ages, in the literature area, the whole reason for you going to college in the first place. Mm-hmm. But that also set the scene or the foundations for your storytelling, did it not?
It did. It did. One of the really amazing tie-ins is it allows you to create a separate persona, a different person that you get to be there. And going back to that idea of life scripts, I started realizing that this other persona I created was very confident, very well liked,
right.
Very well spoken, and popular. All the things that I had never been.
And isn't it interesting? You almost have these two identities. You know, your secret identity is actually really cool, is rich in rewarding life, but actually in an industry or in a field that other people think is a bit odd and unusual. But then your quote-unquote real persona is depressed, unhappy, and really not liking the life that you're leading. But that's everything that everyone says, well, that's how your life should be. So you had that interesting kind of contrast, right? How did that affect you?
Well, it hit me one day. I said, wow, that other guy, he's who I want to be. And I said, I don't have to turn my back on who I've always been, but I think that James can learn a lot from Cedric.
So Cedric was your medieval persona, was it?
Yes, yeah. Right. I didn't realize until some years later that Cedric was actually a name invented by Sir Walter Scott, so it's not even medieval. But anyway, it was what I had. And so yeah, I started pulling those aspects in to being James and making James all of those things that Cedric was.
So if I can just pause you there, because I think what you're telling us here is really ingenious. You created almost a little hypnotic reality where you could experiment and test with an alter ego, someone who you wanted to be. And once you found that it's a rounded person that had the qualities you liked, you actually managed to reintegrate that. So you're really doing a very long piece of hypnotherapy over the space of several years on yourself, just in the way that you are living out these stories, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And how did that affect your depression? Was that part of the solution for you?
Absolutely, yeah. It was definitely a big part of it. Now, there were other things, of course, that helped that lift. I never went for any medication. It was offered to me, and I just I instinctively knew that wasn't the path I wanted to go.
Right.
But one of the cool things about getting to be Cedric was I got to tell stories.
Right. This is the thing I was going to ask you next, because that's part of where because being an English major, one of the downsides is you don't actually tell the stories. You just look at the stories other people have written, which is good for a repertoire, but doesn't really make you necessarily a great storyteller, right?
Right, exactly.
So how did the creative anachronists, how did they help you develop a storytelling style?
Well, the thing about the SCAers is that during the day, most of them or many of them put on armor and hit each other with sticks. And then they'll throw a big feast. And then after that, they would gather around a campfire and entertain each other. And no one brought out a boombox. There was no modern technology to entertain. So we would sing songs, play music, recite poetry, and tell stories. And I was not very good at hitting people with sticks. I had dreams. I will be a great warlord, and no, that really wasn't my forte. Yes. But I was really good at telling stories about people who hit each other with sticks. And
so you're more the bard of the society.
Exactly, and in fact, I ended up being the premier bard of our kingdom, which was Texas and Oklahoma.
Right.
And really kind of hitting the pinnacle of that. The other cool thing about it is almost anywhere you go, if you just say to the general populace, hey, storytelling, they bring their kids.
Right.
And this gave me an opportunity to tell stories to grown-ups.
Right. And that's actually a significant difference, because if all you do is tell stories to kids, it kiddifies your stories, which is great for that medium. But it makes it a little more awkward when you want to use convert those experiences into hypnotic stories that'll heal adults, because the tropes, the language, the imagery, the ideas, and all the rest of it don't really cross over so well from a child to an adult, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you're here at the society. Everyone's bashing themselves, with the wooden sticks and so on, and you're kind of recording these events and somehow turning them into stories. Now that's going to require some skill, because someone else could watch the same event and say, well, Bob bashed Bill and Bill bashed John and John bashed Bill and Bill fell over and then John bashed Bob and then Bob bashed John. I mean, that's not much of a story, is it?
Yeah, that's like the BGATs. Or in Mallory, the Smotes.
Right.
Right. Sir so and so smote so and so, and
right, and it's I'm sure it's very interesting at the time, but actually reading it back is not very thrilling, right? Exactly. So what is it that you had to do to go from smiting to bringing out something that people really enjoy listening to?
Well, I think. Well, there's a number of things. One is really getting into the sensory descriptions and making it epic. But the other thing is assigning meaning to what's happened.
Yes.
And that's so much the key in storytelling, is you're assigning a meaning.
You see, I think you just said two really key words there. One is making it epic, and the other one assigning meaning, right? Because those are the things that the unconscious mind really responds to, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we love those vicarious experiences.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, and a story it's just a sequence of events unless you give it a meaning.
Right. And as soon as the meaning comes out, that's where the magic of the story comes out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So you must have experienced that these stories, as they evolved, that they had an effect on the people that you're talking to as well, because otherwise, they get bored and they would want another story, would they?
Right. So one of the very interesting parts of that whole experience was that I spent some time as an apprentice to another storyteller who'd been doing it for many years before I started. Right. And she really taught me a lot about how we were shaping our subculture with the stories that we were telling, and would even talk to me about, well, here's a problem in our subculture. Here's something that could be improved. What stories can we get out there and tell to influence
James,
and make things happen?
This is priceless. This is wonderful. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but I'm sure you are aware of this actually. How stories. The role they used to play, especially fairy tales and so on, in the old traditional lifestyles, especially in Europe, where the fairy tales we know came from. The storytellers would only know 2, 3, 5, 10 stories, just a small handful. But the storytelling is a form of shamanism, where the idea of a story is it heals the community. They emphasize elements of the story that allows a rift in the community to be repaired again, so that the community can get on with being stronger and better than before, rather than starting to drift apart, losing their way, getting pulled apart by strife and rivalries and whatnot. And you're right in the middle of that tradition. You're actually healing communities when you are watching something happen where the community is losing its essence, its value, and you basically step in with a story. How did that feel, playing that role?
It was an amazing feeling. I felt very connected to everyone else in that subculture, and it was of course very gratifying. And I felt that I was more than simply an entertainer. I love entertainment. I love providing entertainment.
Sure.
But I really loved being able to put out those ideas that were going to be helpful and were going to heal or improve in some way those people that I was spending so much time with.
Because this is your tribe, right? These are people you actually care about.
Exactly.
You don't just turn up as a paid storyteller to go and get the oohs and the ahs and then you leave afterwards. You're actually helping create a world that you want to live in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Well, this is beautiful. I can see it really where this sounds very much like this is the foundation of where your storytelling powers came from, because had that strong community aspect. Now, if it's okay with you, can we just pause that side for a little bit and just explore the other side again? I'm curious as to, because at the moment it seems like your life is going down two tracks. You have this, secret life of the creative anachronisms where you're becoming the person you want to become. Meanwhile, of course, you're still treading the 9 to 5 treadmill that everyone is expecting of you. And you've got to make ends meet in some ways. And I'm sure that as interesting as the Society for Creative Anachronisms was, it didn't necessarily pay the bills. So what did you do with your studies, and how did that transition towards hypnosis over time?
Sure. Well, I finished that master's degree, and of course, my ultimate goal at the time was to go off and get a PhD in Anglo-Saxon literature, just like J.R.R. Tolkien. And however, I thought, well, I need a little breather. I need some space. So
Right.
I went and taught in community colleges for a while,
Okay.
just teaching basic freshman composition.
Right.
And that's a tough way to make a living. There were way
Sure.
too many people qualified to do it, and so I worked part-time at several different institutions, and it was a pretty rough thing. And so at one point I said, all right, I need to go on and get the PhD and become a successful professor, and
Right.
all of that. Yeah, and it seemed like a great dream at the time.
Right.
And part of the reason I thought this was a viable option, both of my parents were professors,
Right.
and we'd had a good life.
So this is part of your own family meme, so to speak, your family
Yeah,
blueprint, right? You saw
yeah,
parents and you decided, well, I can emulate that, and of course the model works because it worked for you. It worked for you growing up, right?
hmm And so at about the time that I said, all right, I need to get ready and go do 4 years of college and get a PhD in Anglo-Saxon Lit, my father was in charge of a search committee for an institution that was expanding in an unprecedented way. And so they had 7 openings for PhDs in
Wow.
English,
Wow.
and he had to go through 7,000 applications.
Oh my goodness. That's
Yeah.
a quite a mountain to climb.
Yeah, and that was the moment when I thought, oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, the wind was out of
Suddenly
my
realizing that
sails.
there's 7,000 PhDs in exactly your field, that's going to basically give you a sense that the competition is not on your side, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so at that point, I said, all right, well, I have to find some other way to pay the bills. And so I had done a little bit of freelance work editing, writing and editing standardized tests. And so I ended up going into that industry full time, which allowed me to move to Austin, Texas, which is a pretty cool place.
Okay.
And I worked in that industry for quite a while. So in certain ways, it was really amazing because I got paid to sit around and write short stories and write
Right.
poems and then
So
write
this
a bunch of
is
questions about them.
And this is partly where you also got to refine your storytelling skill, or in this case, story writing. But that
Yeah.
same sort of creative process, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there is something to, you're just staring at a blank screen and okay, you got to come up with something. And your parameters are
Right.
pretty broad at, you know, eighth grade reading level, nothing that's
Right.
going to offend the censors,
Right.
And so I did that for quite a while, and eventually decided that I really wanted to get out of that 9 to 5 setting, that it was going to kill me. And so I said, well, I'll do
Yeah.
this as a freelance writer, because
Right.
working as an editor, I had edited a lot of the work of the freelance writers. And so I did freelance writing for a while. I moved out to the country, got a lovely estate with 6.5 acres of pine forest.
Oh, beautiful.
yeah, it's my little slice of heaven.
Mm.
And did that for a while. And at the same time, I was also supporting myself to a small degree with music.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
very few
So
people say, well, music supported my day job.
I know, especially your day job writing for the government, right?
Yeah, and at that point, it was really, yeah, it was much more the freelance writing that was paying the bills. But I was
Right.
doing
Right.
music at Renaissance festivals on the side.
Nice. Okay. So you've gone down the more traditional path, and you're slowly starting to veer away. Luckily, as you say, you had music to support you whilst you figured things out. So how did this then develop into hypnosis? Because there's a theme that developed. It's not just the fact you were born as a hypno baby. You've had a stronger connection to hypnosis, on and off throughout your life as well, right?
Yeah, and I often I didn't call it hypnosis. I didn't
Of
know
course.
what it was
Mm-hmm.
per se, but I knew that our thoughts and our imaginations were powerful. At one point, shortly after I met the woman who became my wife,
Mm-hmm.
she had a medical emergency, and
Right.
in fact, I met her parents for the first time in the hospital.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would definitely be an interesting meeting, right?
Hi. Hello, ma'am. Yeah, my name is James. I'm calling you because I'm dating your daughter and she's in the hospital. Yeah, that was
Yeah, not the
interesting.
conversation you probably rehearsed in your mind, is it?
No, not at all. But as my wife was getting ready to go into surgery, my girlfriend at the time, she was very
Mm-hmm.
nervous,
Mm,
and I took her hand and I said, "Just close your eyes and imagine that you're in a beautiful forest." And I just
right,
started describing a peaceful scene, and she
right,
relaxed and was able to go in there. And I had no idea. I don't think I even knew the term guided visualization at that point,
right,
guided imagery. I was
mm,
just, this is what I did if I wanted to relax. And
right. And I'm guessing that your years telling stories at the campfire is what helped you really develop the scenery and realize that that sensory richness of the scenery is part of what really engages the mind, right?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Go on.
so, in along with all of that, of course, I mentioned I was very interested in, sort of questioning reality, our own thoughts. So I got interested
Right,
in shamanism
right.
and studied shamanism with the people at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And and in fact, one of the shamanic teachers I encountered was actually a hypnotist as well.
Interesting.
And I remember saying to her, "So what's the difference between a shamanic trance and a hypnotic trance?" And she said, "Ah, it's
Right.
the same thing." I don't know if that's really true. Literally, it's all definitions, but
Right, of course. But at least that created a bridge back to the hypnosis world for you.
mhm.
And having had all the benign associations you had as a child to it, I'm sure that um, probably rekindled a curiosity you might have had back then. Or so
Yeah.
what happened then? So you had this shamanic teacher, you've been learning about shamanic trances and things like that,
hmm
and then one of them
And
tells you about hypnosis. So what happens then?
well, about that time, I started having the freelance projects I was going.
Hmm.
They all went wrong.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was doing good work. I thought I was doing the same stuff they'd all raved about the year
Hmm.
before,
Hmm.
and no, they were all saying, "James, what's wrong with you? The
Wow.
stuff you're producing is terrible."
Wow.
And was asking myself that question, what is wrong with me? Why am I not doing this? And I thought
Mm.
about it a while and I realized, well, I hate it.
That would do
And
it.
and I realized my unconscious mind was telling me, don't do this anymore. It's
Mm.
terrible. It doesn't
Mm.
contribute to society. You don't
Mm.
like doing it. It's
Mm.
sucking your soul out. Quit
Right.
it.
Right.
So,
And it was doing it in a very dramatic way.
yeah.
Ironically, of course, through your storytelling, which you're pretty good at, except when you're doing it in that context.
Right. So yeah, it basically, I mean, my unconscious mind kind of burned the ships behind me
Right. Right.
and said, "Nope, you're not able to do that anymore." And so then I'm staring at the world saying, well, okay, I could play music all the time, but I'd never be home. And, I kind of like my home. I'm very fond of my wife. I like to see her on a regular basis.
Well, that's probably why you got married, right?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. Yeah. So, I kind of just looked around at the world, and I had a friend to become a professional storyteller and go around telling stories. And I couldn't quite wrap my head around that. And then I thought about hypnosis, and actually, uh, my wife at the time was doing a gig as a fortune teller,
Okay.
and she was hired to do a high school party,
Right.
and through some accident, the person in charge of the entire event ended up giving her the paperwork that listed what everyone was being paid.
Okay.
And I saw how much the hypnotist was getting paid. And
Oh, okay.
I thought, wait,
And you
you
went,
get paid to do that? Wow. Um,
right. That basically you went, okay, of all these entertainment styles, this one's not bad, right?
yeah. And of course, what's funny is while I've done a few stage shows, I've never really made more than a three-figure salary at it.
No, no.
You
Well,
know?
I'm guessing that's more because your real interest lies in the healing arts, right?
It does. One of my conditions for a new pursuit was it has to help people.
Right. Right.
And I said hypnosis. It's fascinating. It looks really fun. I know it's for real. It ties in with all these things I've done, and I get to help people, which I had never really felt like I did enough of in
Which is,
any.
I suspect, why you burnt out of the standardized test questions because
Yeah, I
let's
felt
face it,
like I was
what
hurt.
child likes that, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. I felt it was a terrible thing. I'm
Right.
kind of shudder about having been involved with that.
It sounds almost like you need to go to therapy for having been involved in some
Yeah,
evil government conspiracy, right?
I need to put myself in a circle of forgiveness for that one.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
forgive yourself for that. It's all right.
All right, so we've got a very clear transition here now. So you've gone from your student phase to your working phase. Then the door on the 9 to 5 world, the standardized test world, gets firmly shut on you by your unconscious. And as one door closes, the hypnosis door very clearly seems to be beckoning you. So tell me, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in hypnosis, what it was like to get started, your how you learned and how it helped you become really a professional hypnotist?
Sure. Well, of course, the first thing I did was start grabbing books and reading books, and the first one I read was pretty terrible. Uh,
Yeah. So,
and
so roughly what decade was this? 80s, 90s,
this is 2000s.
2000s.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so there's a reasonable selection of hypnosis books around now, but still a lot of pretty bad ones, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I just, went down to half price books and grabbed whatever was cheapest. And,
Yeah,
yeah,
just to kind of get to the basic level learning, and of course, it's very hard to know what books to look out for when
yeah,
you're just starting, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I had no idea, but I looked around and I tried to find a course that was going to fit. Now at that point, pretty much my only income was playing at Renaissance festivals, which happen on weekends, and of course most hypnosis courses happen on weekends.
Right. So that'll be a big
So
clash there, right?
yeah, that wasn't looking good. I happened to be involved in a show in Austin. It was just an amateur show a friend of mine was putting on, and I agreed,
Okay.
okay, I'll come help.
Like a
And
theater show or
yeah, it was like a variety show.
okay, okay.
And one of the performers there was an amateur who had a lovely voice, but was terrified of singing on stage. And at this point, I was getting pretty interested, and I said, "Well, the two ways that I've heard of, the one I know to get over stage fright is you get a job at a Renaissance festival because you
Right,
don't
because
have
they
enough
just do
time.
it, right?
Yeah, you can get scared about the first show, but it's over in half an hour, and you got another one an hour later, and it's too exhausting to have stage fright there." And I said, but I've heard about hypnosis helping with that. And it was so interesting because she said, oh, yeah, there's this lady in San Antonio who's a great hypnosis teacher. So I
Mm-hmm.
ran to the internet and I Googled hypnosis teacher San Antonio, and I found
Right.
Kathy Moore at the San
Okay.
Antonio Wellness Center. Now I realized years later the person was probably talking about Ann King in Bernie, Texas, right outside of San Antonio.
But it's okay. It pushed you in the right direction anyways, right?
Yeah, it sent me to really the perfect teacher for me at the time.
Okay,
And
so how come you say that?
well, Kathy was just interested enough in, shamanism and what we kind of call the woo-woo side of things,
Mm-hmm.
but not really outrageously woo-woo. And I use
Right.
that term affectionately.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I I used to say I have kind of one foot in each camp, but actually now it's more like I've got a few toes still in woo-woo, and I'm much more
Right.
in the science camp.
Right.
But at the time, it was an excellent fit. Her
Mm.
classes were Monday through Friday, 5 or 8 in the morning to 5 p.m.
Oh, even better for you, right? Because
Yeah,
your paid gigs were everything but that time.
exactly, exactly. I had a cousin in San Antonio I went and lived with during those weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there were only two students who signed up initially for that
Mm-hmm.
round, and the other
Mm-hmm.
one dropped out quickly. So I
So you basically got private tuition.
I did, yeah.
That's amazing.
It was
That's amazing. Getting private tuition from someone who is in private practice,
mhm.
that must have really set you up well.
It was fantastic. She would
Mm.
invite people in. She ran a whole wellness center, so they had an
Mm-hmm.
entire mailing list of people who
Mm-hmm.
came for massages, acupuncture, chiropractic, all the other different modalities, as well as hypnosis. So she
Right.
just put out a blast that said, "I've got this great new student. He's really fantastic. Come let him practice with you. It's free."
Wonderful, wonderful. So this is kind of an interesting twist of life that the English major who is fascinated with the medieval ages should basically rediscover his the apprenticeship model, which of course was a very medieval thing, in learning to do hypnosis. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I had never put that all together in that way, but
yeah.
that's what storytellers do.
Well, exactly. So you're now reliving the Middle Ages in the modern age, and how did you find your apprenticeship? How long did it go for? How did that prepare you to start your own private practice? Because it's a very quote unquote non-traditional way of learning.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it was overall it was 250 hours, of which um, I'm trying to remember if it was 3 or 4 weeks solid, which were spread out over several months, and in between I
Right,
had to accrue a certain number of practicum hours
right.
and do projects, review books. It actually had a real written exam and a practical exam
This sounds
at
like a
the
proper
end.
course here. This is like a
Yeah,
proper foundation, not
yeah,
your classic weekend and you're ready to go course, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, right near the end of it, again, kind of it was one of those things that worked out in my favor. Maybe one thing that worked out well for me is my teacher was not terribly good at marketing her classes,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
she actually had Shelley Stockwell Nicholas, the
Oh
president of the
wow.
National
Yes, yes, I
Hypnosis
know Shelley
Federation.
Stockwell. Wonderful lady.
Yeah, and so she came in for a weekend to teach this little mini conference, but as it ended up, there were only a handful of students.
Mm-hmm.
And so at one point, I essentially had Shelley Stockwell Nicholas, along with Kathy Moore, my instructor, and two other hypnotists Shelley brought with her, all critiquing me.
Oh my goodness,
And
you're getting a whole star panel all
yeah,
focused on you. That's amazing.
it was, yeah, I mean, the best student teacher ratio you can imagine.
Yeah.
It was a great thing. So I finished all of that, and I hung out my shingle out in Bastrop, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little town,
Mm-hmm.
and then struggled through several years of trying to keep a practice going.
Right. Yes, because of course that's the other side of the coin, which is in the hypnosis world, most hypnotists are so keen on learning the skills to help others, and that's a good thing. That and I've been as guilty of this as well. We think that hanging up our shingle and our sheer love of the art will be enough, but it's not. right? There's a lot of know-how that comes into how to attract clients, how to build your practice, how to make all that work, and that's where sometimes you have to meet a bit of reality and think, all right, I've got to do some learning here, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it took me a while to get to that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, me too. I think everyone's in the same boat.
yeah.
But then, of course, you stuck through it. Now, I know you've been through a number of hardships in terms of things that have gone wrong. How did you? What is it that kept you going? Because there's one thing about starting hypnosis because you enjoy it. There's another thing going to a intensive learning program like it sounds like this apprenticeship was, which is fantastic. But that still means you're being motivated by someone else. Someone else has designed the process. They're giving you the task. They've got the roadmap for you. But then you're out on your own, and it's very tempting when trouble comes to just throw the towel in and say, I just wasn't cut out for this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and I did have a few moments where I got to wrestle once again with my depression on that. I
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
had I remember one time saying, I can't give this away. What the heck?
Mm-hmm.
And my wife very kindly slapped me on the top of the head and said, "You can't do that. Stop it."
Right.
And
Well,
and
that's when it's nice having partnerships like that reminds you who you are, right?
yeah. And so yeah, there were a lot of interesting challenges there. My first client, paying client, I had no idea, really how to handle things very well. I mean, I had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of hypnotic skills, and
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and she was amazed. I could make things get hot and cold in her hand, and
Right.
do all sorts of stuff. But she had come to me to quit smoking, and I didn't charge her properly, and I didn't structure
Right.
things well,
Right.
and she smokes to this day.
Right.
And
Well,
in fact, I occasionally go into the business where she's a receptionist or
mm-hmm.
call to set up an appointment, and she'll
Mm-hmm.
answer the phone. I'm like, oh God, oh God.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for sharing that story, James, because once someone starts succeeding in this industry, in this field, a lot of people who are looking to emulate their success just think, well, they were born to it. They just landed on their feet, but I'm different. Life is not on my side, right?
Yeah,
And we've all got our share of those skeletons to cover. There's a number of people I would love to go back to and actually do my job properly, because at the time, oh, I messed up so badly. It just did no. I'm not saying that I harmed them, but I didn't definitely do any good for them. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, nothing's going to be 100%.
No, no.
And I'm
Go ahead.
glad, though, going back to that apprenticeship, for all of the times that we had volunteer clients come in, because I'd had some successes under my belt
And that
at that
certainly
point.
helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I knew that things were going to work out, even if it was going to take me a while to figure out how to do it well.
Right. And this is actually very important for those listening to and trying to emulate your journey. Even if they can't find a person to take them in on an apprenticeship like you did, which is an amazing deal, by the way.
Yeah.
I searched high and low for a deal like that, and I couldn't find one. Um, but then the thing to remember is, whilst you're in that stage where you've got some skills, but you're not really confident enough yet to go out and hang a shingle up, then just do pro bono clients. Work with friends,
Yeah,
work with family, work with people for free. Because if at the end of the day no results get done, well, that's okay, right?
right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So then, what is that kept you going at the times when the depression did kick in, or when life really did get harder, and you seriously wondered whether or not you were cut out for this career?
Well, you know, in truth, um, I never doubted that this is what I had to do.
Interesting. So,
Um,
so what is
yeah.
that? That's the bit I'm interested in, right? That's that little spark in the back of your mind that says, "Keep going. This is right. This is just a temporary setback, and so on." What do you think that's based on?
I think a lot of it was the thrill I got um, working with people and
Right.
doing hypnosis for them, seeing their successes. You know,
Right.
performers, we talk about the performance high. and you're just kind of flying and feeling wonderful at the end of a great show. And I discovered that's how I felt doing hypnosis for people.
Right.
And then you add in the wonderful feeling of noting that, wow, these people have experienced improvement in their life. And for a while I thought, wow, that's because I'm totally awesome. And then I realized
Yeah.
the only awesome thing I really have is I get to show them how awesome they are.
Right. Now,
Yeah, yeah,
can I just pause you on that one a little, James? Because you just uncovered a hidden, the secret love child of the hypnosis world that no one really wants to talk about, but it's actually very important, right? I mean, on the one side, we have this idea that when we're helping others, it actually really feels good, and when we fail or when life gets hard, it's really important to remember those times. It's what sees you through. Clearly, it did it for you, right?
yeah.
But on the flip side, once you've done that for a while, there is a downside to it, and that's the arrogance or the path of power, where you think, I am the mighty wizard, I control the universe, I control your mind. And of course, it's that kind of hubris doesn't do very well. So how did you overcome that stage? Because I mean, I've fallen into it, and pretty much every accomplished hypnotist I know has somewhere, somehow, had a chunk being taken out of their backside when life caught up to their own hubris. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've had my moments like that for sure. But really going back to the SCA, a big part of the ethos of the SCA is service and
Right.
using your skills not just to advance yourself, but to serve the kingdom and the society. So I already kind of had that idea in there that I need to be doing this to serve and not just to aggrandize myself. I knew there would be enough of that already
Right.
if I
Right.
just helped other people and just did good things.
Right. That's wonderful. So it sounds like you actually got prepared. This SCA sounds quite cool, actually, because a lot of people when they hear you, you run around in chainmail and bashed out with swords, they think, oh, that's crazy, silly people and whatnot. But actually, there's some very wholesome values and skills that they seem to have developed in you, and quite frankly, they protected you from yourself, from the dark side of hubris, right?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, kind of a reflection I've had on the SCA is that it's almost like a remedial school for people who haven't fully developed their social skills yet.
Right.
Which sounds a little bad, and the fact is there are plenty of members who lack social skills yet. But for me, it really was this kind of remedial school because I had been a painfully shy child. I had not interacted well. I had not believed in myself. And I learned all of those things in this sort of alternate reality
Right.
that is the SCA.
And in some respect, that really mirrors the hypnotic relationship, where we create a safe space inside the client's mind where they can experience themselves as being different in a safe way, and they can try out different realities, different ways of being, until they find the one that they think, you know what, I think I like being that person more than I like being who I am right now. And that's when we do the classic integration, where we say, great, because after all, it's still you. You created the alter ego.
Yes.
It's all your stuff, right? People laugh sometimes at people online who have their second life and whatever. They live their life online. But what they don't realize is these people are capable of being that, because how else would they create that online? It's all coming from inside them, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think the SCA helped you to develop your hypnotic style in both the storytelling, but also in your general approach to hypnosis? Because I have a feeling that there's a lot of crossover points there.
Yeah. Well, definitely in my general style, one of the things I noticed way before I thought about it being hypnosis was that the stories I was telling were having physical effects on people who were listening. And
Right.
I started making it my goal. For instance, if I could tell a story on a hot afternoon in Texas, with the sun shining down, if I could get people to shiver during that story, I'd won. I was doing what I needed to do.
Right, and this is before you had any knowledge of hypnosis, that you're
Yeah.
actually suggesting the effect.
Yeah, I did not know that at all. What I knew, and I didn't really even have much sense of trance at that point, but I knew that I wanted them to be sitting there, often with their eyes glazed over, experiencing this story
It's too funny.
that I was telling them, and getting real visceral reactions and
Right,
changing their opinions, spurring them to action.
right.
And so when I became a hypnosis student, I realized, oh, I was doing group hypnosis back then. I just didn't
Right.
know what to call it.
Not just group hypnosis, you were actually doing conversational hypnosis because these are
Hmm.
eyes wide open trances. If anyone came in and said, "What are you guys doing?" they would have said, "Oh, nothing, just having a chat," right?
Right.
So, as far as anyone's concerned, you actually did what the holy grail for many people is, which is totally covert change work. And you actually that preceded your formal hypnosis training. That actually is a wonderful base to base your other skills off of. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And I had interesting models in medieval literature.
Okay.
Um, and this is something I eventually went back to the SCA and taught a class called Viking Hypnosis for Warriors.
Oh, nice.
And the thing is, in the Viking sagas and in the Old English and Norse poetry, you have these uh, characters that modern readers think of as boastful. We say, oh, those Vikings, they were so boastful, always talking about how great they were and all the things they'd done. But if you look at it very closely, it's an NLP process.
Right.
You think about all the things that you've done, you speak them out loud of your great deeds. So you elicit a state
Yep.
by revivifying past events. And if you don't have enough of your own, you talk about what your ancestors have done.
Because that
So,
gives you the same state and you feel
right.
the lineage connection so you can borrow their stories, right?
Yeah, so you have a kind of well, light trance identification as opposed to deep trance identification. And of course, this was often done, it was done right before the battle. So people would do this right before the battle, but they would prepare for it in the mead hall. The usually, traditionally, the lady of the hall would carry the mead horn around, and they would drink the mead and stand there and deliver what's called a gilp quita.
Right.
And gilp is kind of related to our word Yelp.
Right.
So, which our review site, weird. So
Yeah,
they would
exactly.
they would talk about their 5-star Yelp reviews. They would talk about all these things and elicit the state, and then the Lord of the Hall would give them a golden armband called a biaga, or a ring, is how it's often translated. And it's an arm ring, not a finger ring, and they would swear on that golden ring and on that golden mead that they would, on the day of battle, do great things. And they'd say, I've done these great things in the past. I will do the same thing in the future.
Which is a classic hypnotic process. It's
Exactly.
basically, it's the circle of excellence, you know? Put
Yeah.
into this, and you've got a ring in it. Put into
Yeah.
this ring all of your past greatness, all your peak performances, all your ancestors, and your beliefs and your values and all that sort of stuff. And now, basically, put it into the future. That's what the act of swearing is, right? It's going into the future and repeating the greatness of the past. And I can totally see that being a hypnotic process there. And of course, the act of speaking it out loud in public, commitment and consistency, the speaking it out part engages more of the nervous system. So it's actually creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Right, right. And of course, that physical anchor of the ring itself
Of
that
course,
they're going
of
to
course.
wear into battle later. And so it's amazing to me that, well, it shouldn't be amazing. These processes are human. But it was really neat that I had that experience. And of course, the other variant of the Gilp Quita is not when the warrior himself does it, but when either usually his girlfriend or wife would do it for him, or the skald, the poet for the Lord, would get up and inspire the warriors with that same kind of format. And I actually, in the SCA, got to do this.
Oh, amazing.
And it's so cool when you get to live one of these things you've always imagined, which is
Right,
what our
right,
clients get to do.
right.
And I did this at an event, and the I was to inspire the warriors of the hawk field and to go
Mm-hmm.
beat the other side. And so I wove in a bunch of metaphors about the animals, the different fields represented, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of opened up, and after a few lines, it was just flowing out of me.
Nice.
And they got there to the field, and the minute that the marshals, the referees, said "lay on," which means start fighting,
Mm-hmm.
the folks I had just talked to they were in an altered state.
I
I mean,
believe it.
they just slammed across the field, and it was like nothing to take
Um,
out the other guys.
I was going to say, I'm surprised they didn't start going berserker on the others as
You
well.
know, it was pretty wild. So
Wow.
my teacher at the
Mm-hmm.
time wasn't at that event, but the next time she saw me, she said, "So, Cedric, I would love to hear this new piece that you did for the Warriors of the Hawkfield. I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to know what you said because I've heard people talk about it."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, I would like to know what I said too."
Which is how you know you're really in the zone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So let's see if we can take this back round to the idea of hypnosis. Clearly, you're a powerful storyteller, and you know you've had something that I guess most boys fantasize about but never actually get to do, which is you've inspired a rabble to unite in battle, which I'm sure every boy at some point has had their Braveheart moment in their mind where they've turned the sway of a battle by giving an inspiring speech, right?
Yeah.
But let's go back to the idea of hypnosis now, because a lot of hypnotists are a little scared of telling stories in their sessions, especially just doing stories that transform rather than just entertain. How did you start blending them in and using this stuff in your own therapy sessions? How did you develop that specific style of skill? Because I'm guessing when clients come in to start smoking, you don't get up and start telling them about their Viking quests, right?
No, not usually. Though I have had one or two clients from the SCA show up,
Okay,
and
well
it's
then you
when
have a
I do that.
secret
Yeah,
ace in the back of your sleeve,
I
exactly.
do. But I started. Well, it was a very organic process. I started listening to what people were saying and
Hmm.
thinking about stories that I knew that related to the issues they were facing and the changes they need to make, which was the same thing that my teacher in the SCA taught me to do for the organization.
Right.
So and sometimes those stories were, set stories I already knew. Sometimes they were very quickly adapted. Sometimes
Hmm.
they're spun on the spot, though more
Hmm.
often I'm drawing on some classic theme I already know.
So
Um,
your English literature background definitely helped from that one, right?
Definitely, definitely. But we all experience stories all the
Of
time.
course.
And so people are like, "Where do you find your stories?" Everywhere. They're all around you. You can't get away from stories. You just
Yes.
have to know how to look for them.
Right, and that's one of the key things we'll be exploring, of course, when we get to the seminar portion here.
Yeah.
Not we'll be looking at some of the principles to look out for, but also how to spot an event that has real story potential that you can then use for therapeutic purposes. And
Mhm.
of course, just so anyone, just give people a little heads up on what's coming, because I think this is such an exciting thing. I'm looking forward to this so much, James. Because what we've decided to do is we're going to actually go through case histories where you actually give client issues, and then you'll actually tell the stories you told them, so that we can then later on analyze how they match the issues. And of course, we've got the benefit of history now to look back on to see how those things worked. And I think it's such a really ingenious way of looking at stories, because they're not just guesswork anymore. They're actually working stories. They're stories that did things, right?
Yeah.
So coming back to today then, can you give us a kind of like a quick heads up? What is it for you the essence of that, what allowed you to start using stories with your clients? Because this is something that I think you did right from the start, right from the get-go. You weren't one of these people afraid to tell stories and went, let's try this thing now. You actually started right from the beginning because of your own background, right?
Yeah, I have to give props to Kathy Moore, my first teacher. I think, well, actually, pretty much on the first day, she had us working script free.
Oh, cool.
And now we still looked at scripts, and occasionally early
Sure.
on would read some scripts to each other. But and one of the first things she did when we still had another student in the class is she said, describe your ideal day to the other person, and then they're going to hypnotize you and tell you that story.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that
Yeah,
exercise.
it was
That's
a
a beautiful exercise.
great exercise. But it was just kind of natural. I mean, I love telling stories anyway. So when somebody's there in my office and they they tell me about, for instance, having boundary issues and wondering, what it is that how do you make the difference between keeping a boundary and being aggressive? And I remembered a story about my father literally having to set some physical boundaries and would naturally tell that. Now, sometimes occasionally I have a client where I don't tell them any stories. I think that's possible, maybe, or at least where I don't tell them many.
All right.
And then quite often I'll use several stories during the pre-talk.
Right.
I'm a big believer in the fact that we can make the change in the pre-talk and then ratify it in the trance.
Amen for that one. I think it's so much easier when you fix the stuff whilst they're busy being distracted that
Right.
nothing's started yet. And then the
Yeah.
actual trance is the ritual that they go through, kind of like a ceremony of, the ceremony that says you are now a different person, but really it's already happened beforehand, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I love telling a story or two, while we're in the pre-talk, and then sometimes telling some stories during the trance. But even if I don't tell any new stories, I might refer back to those stories I've already told during their trance.
Right.
And one of the cool things about stories is if you have a story that a lot of people know and that your client already knows, you don't even have to retell it.
Right. You just hinted it, right?
Yeah, I know we're case histories are for later. I should save this one. But yeah, it's and every once in a while I've had a client where I just started telling them stories during the pre-talk and then said, I've got another story about this. And usually they'll kind of reflect. And so it's a conversation punctuated by stories.
Right.
And but I've had a few where I said, there's a story I want to tell you about that. Let me dim the lights and you just close your eyes.
Interesting.
And then we transition right into the more formal trance.
Right.
So I've had a few where it was nothing but stories, and actually I kick myself that I didn't record those because I'd kind of like to know what I said.
That was the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty brilliant. I don't know.
So lesson number one, always carry a recording device just in case, right?
Yeah.
Whether you are trying to inspire a mob of Vikings or whether you're helping someone overcome their fear of cats, either way, capture the story so you can find out what's the gold. Because often those times when you're inspired, that's when you're really in touch with your own unconscious, and the gold really does come out, doesn't it?
It does. It does. I mean, that's an uptime trance.
And what I really like is this technique, your Viking heroes technique. It could so easily be adapted for storytellers, where they just tell themselves, they boast to themselves of the stories they've told and the hypnosis they've done that's worked, and then swear on the story ring, so to speak, that they will produce more stories like that for their clients. I mean, you don't have to go into battle with this. You can just you change the vibe to a more healing vibe and actually get the same effect, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it works for healing storytellers. It works very well for performers in general. 'Cause,
For sure.
I mean, I've had times where I'm performing to a crowd of anywhere from 300 to 1,000 people who are really into what I'm doing, and it's
That's
totally
total rush,
amazing and
of
it's
course, of
great.
course, yeah.
And then the next week, I'm on a stage that looks like a condemned outhouse with three people in the audience,
And at those
and
times, you need the other stories to keep you going, right?
yeah, and so and I really I've held on to those a lot of those moments. I've held on to the time when I had the entire feast hall of 700 people chanting the name of the new king because I just recounted his lineage and his deeds.
Right, right.
And I mean, right now talking about it, I can see that scene. I'm back there a little bit.
Right, and this is one of the
Yeah.
secrets that you'll be discussing with us when we get to
Well,
the
yeah,
seminar portion, which is go first,
that's
see
right.
your stories, live your stories,
Mm,
remember your stories, not just as a fact on a page, but as a living, breathing organism that is something you can actually experience. And even if they were invented stories, still live them inside your mind, because that's so much easier to do is to describe what you're seeing than, you know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm always puzzled by people who say, "Well, I don't know if I can remember the story." Well, it's not. I mean, I've memorized a lot of song lyrics and I've
Mm.
memorized a lot of poems, and so yeah, there are techniques for that. But for me, a story, it's just something you tell. You were there, or you're imagining you're there, and you're seeing all of it. And filmmakers love calling themselves storytellers, which irks me slightly. But to me, it's sort of the opposite process. I'm
Their
I'm
stories show
taking
us, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm taking a story that I'm viewing in my head as either a movie or a storyboard, and I'm turning it into words, which is then becoming a movie in the listener's head.
Right.
And I just love that way of almost conveying a picture from my brain to their brain.
Absolutely. So, James, I think one thing that's really come out of our conversation today is you clearly know your stuff when it comes to storytelling. I've really enjoyed a lot of the stories you've told us today. I mean, you've really littered them throughout to make the conversation flow nicely and richly. And as I've said to everyone, I am very excited to go on to the next phase, which is where we'll start. Well, we'll start off by just looking at some of the principles, which is important, of course.
Hmm.
But then we'll just dive into the actual case histories, so people can start seeing for themselves what the pattern of storytelling is like. It's almost like a mini apprenticeship, the way that you had it with the CSA and with other people. And I think that's going to be a really charming way of getting people switched on to stories without being afraid of them, right?
Good, yeah. Well, I'm very excited about it. Really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, James, thank you very much for your giving us your time on this and giving us a history of your tour through hypnosis and hypnotic storytelling. Remember, folks, this is James Hazlerig from hypnotic-stories.com. I'm Igor Ledochowski from hypnosistrainingacademy.com, and I hope you've enjoyed this interview, and I really hope you'll join us for the first seminar portion, where James will show us how actually you do all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Until then, guys, any last words you have for people, James?
Oh, well, I just have to say I'm really honored, Igor, that you've invited me to participate in this. I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you for saying that. And James, I am so excited to have you here as well. With the first time I heard you actually tell hypnotic stories, I knew I wanted you to be part of this series because you definitely belong up there with the greats. So we'll be demonstrating that and proving that very shortly. So I look forward to our next conversation where we'll dive